He was James Bond, the ultimate gentleman. But behind closed doors, Roger Moore harbored a secret grudge against none other than Frank Sinatra. And now, decades later, the truth about their fiery feud is finally coming out. It's messier than anyone expected, and it all started with a glass of whiskey and a very public insult. Join us as we dive into their Freud. If you were around in the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, chances are you remember the face, the voice, and the impeccable charm of Roger Moore. For many, he wasn't just James Bond, he was their James Bond. But before all the tuxedos and Aston Martins, Roger Moore lived a life that echoed the struggles and triumphs of an entire generation. Born Roger George Moore on October 14, 1927 in Stockwell, South London, his early days were far removed from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. His father was a police officer, his mother a homemaker. Like so many children of that era, Moore grew up during a time of deep uncertainty, the tail end of the Great Depression followed by the grim years of World War II. Those who lived through it remember the ration books, the blackout curtains, the radio broadcasts filled with news from the front. For Roger, these early years instilled values that would stay with him forever: humility, discipline, and a quiet sense of duty. During the war, Moore served his country as a second lieutenant in the Royal Army Service Corps. Stationed in post-war West Germany, he carried out his responsibilities with the kind of grace and seriousness that would later mark his most iconic roles. His military service didn't make headlines, but it left its mark in the form of a deep respect for service camaraderie and leadership. When the war ended and Europe slowly began to rebuild, Moore turned toward a very different path: the stage. He enrolled at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA, where he studied alongside future legends. His journey as an actor began modestly in modeling jobs and small roles in British television. Yet, even then, his natural good looks, gentle voice, and polished manners made him stand out. You may remember him as Simon Templar in The Saint, That Slick and Clever Adventurer who always managed to stay 2 steps ahead. From 1962 to 1969. The Saint became a hit both in the UK and in America, and for many TV watchers of the era, Moore became a familiar and welcome presence in their living rooms. Then, in 1973, something magical happened. With the departure of Sean Connery and a brief interlude by George Lazenby, the producers of the James Bond films were in need of a new 007. Enter Roger Moore, and what a difference he made. From Live and Let Die to A View to a Kill. Moore played James Bond across 7 films over a span of 12 years, longer than any other actor in the franchise at that time. Yeah, tall. And oh, what memories those films bring back. Who could forget the outlandish stunts, the exotic locations, the beautiful Bond girls, and that unmistakable Roger Moore charm? While Connery's Bond was brooding and brawny, Moore brought something lighter and more refined. He was cool under pressure, always ready with a clever line or a sly smile. Whether facing villains in space in Moonraker or skiing down snowy slopes in The Spy Who Loved Me, Moore's Bond never lost his composure. For many of us who came of age during those years, Roger Moore was Bond. His portrayal defined the role not just through action, but through elegance, humor, and class. He didn't just fight the bad guys, he outwitted them all while looking as if he'd just stepped out of a Savile Row tailor's showroom. Yet, off-screen Moore was equally admirable. Known for his kindness and humility, he was a devoted humanitarian and a longtime UNICEF Goodwill ambassador. He often said that he didn't take himself too seriously, but he did take his responsibilities seriously, especially those that allowed him to help others. Though millions remember Roger Moore as the ever-suave James Bond, those who followed his career closely know that his talent and heart extended far beyond tuxedos and spy gadgets. After hanging up his license to kill in A View to a Kill, 1985, Moore didn't quietly disappear from the public eye, far from it. He continued to act in film and television, often choosing roles that let him lean into or gently mock his James Bond persona. In The Wild Geese, 1978, he played alongside screen giants Richard Burton and Richard Harris, portraying a group of mercenaries on a daring rescue mission. The film was gritty, fast-paced, and a world away from the polished glamour of MI6. He followed this with The Seawolves 1980, once again stepping into the shoes of a wartime hero, this time with fellow legends Gregory Peck and David Niven. And then there was The Cannonball Run 1981, a wild, hilarious romp across America that poked fun at everything, including Roger himself. He played a character clearly based on his Bond image, a tuxedoed racer who insists he is Roger Moore. It was Moore's wink at the audience, a self-aware joke that showed he never took himself too seriously. For those of us watching at the time, it was refreshing. Here was a man willing to laugh with us, not above us. But perhaps the most lasting and meaningful chapter of Roger Moore's life came not on screen, but in service to others. In 1991, he was appointed a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. Many celebrities lend their names to causes, but Roger gave his time, his voice, and his heart. If you were following the news in the 90s or early 2000s, you might have seen him not on a red carpet, but in a dusty village surrounded by children working quietly and respectfully with local communities. He traveled the world advocating for children's rights, clean water vaccinations, and access to education. He didn't do it for headlines or accolades. He did it because he cared. The world noticed. In 1999, he was appointed a commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE. And in 2003, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for his charitable work. Sir Roger Moore, a title well-earned not just for what he did, but how he did it. Even with all that success, Moore never lost his trademark humility or sense of humor. He once quipped, "I only have 3 expressions as Bond, right eyebrow raised, left eyebrow raised, and eyebrows crossed when holding a gun." It was that light touch, that ability to never take himself too seriously, that made him so loved. But his enduring popularity suggested otherwise. Fans loved him not only for his work, but for the warmth and accessibility he exuded both on and off screen. As the years unfolded, Roger Moore's personal life became a mirror of the characters he so often portrayed on screen. Charming, complicated, and deeply human. His romantic journey, much like his filmography, was filled with sweeping passions, emotional crossroads, and the bittersweet toll that fame can exact on matters of the heart. After his first marriage to Dorn Van Steen quietly dissolved under the growing weight of Moore's ambitions and shifting world, it was his whirlwind relationship with the fiery Dorothy Squires that truly captured public attention. Dorothy, already a celebrated singer in the United Kingdom, and a woman of tremendous force and flair, was Moore's opposite in many ways. Older, more established, and possessing a formidable presence that lit up any room she entered, their romance was in the beginning electric. She championed Roger at a time when he was still finding his place in the world, helping him secure roles, making introductions, and believing in his potential even when others didn't yet see it. For a while, they were inseparable. A glamorous pair frequently seen in society columns and theater premieres, feeding off each other's energy and drive. But that intensity, so alluring at first, eventually gave way to clashes and emotional storms. As Roger's fame continued to grow, particularly after his starring role in The Saint, the cracks in the relationship widened. Dorothy's possessiveness, coupled with the demands of Moore's blossoming international career, created an atmosphere that was increasingly fraught with tension. In the end, their love, which had once been so fiercely protective, unraveled under the pressure of ambition and incompatibility. Yet despite their painful separation, Squires would remain a poignant figure in Moore's story, often resurfacing in interviews and memoirs as a reminder of a tumultuous chapter that shaped the man he became. In the early 1960s, while filming in Italy, Roger Moore's life took another dramatic turn when he met the warm and refined Luisa Mattioli, an Italian actress whose quiet strength and continental grace stood in stark contrast to Dorothy's tempestuous spirit. With Louisa, Moore found what seemed to be a deeper calm, a more enduring, stable love that offered him respite from the emotional chaos of his earlier relationships. They began a life together in Rome, far from the glare of the British press, and in the serenity of the Italian countryside. Moore found both artistic inspiration and emotional healing. Their bond deepened over the years, and they eventually married in 1969, after the long and complex process of finalizing his divorce from Squires. Moore and Mattioli had 3 children together, and for many years they represented a picture of stability and family life amid the whirlwind of a global film career. Yet, as with many stories that stretch across decades, change was inevitable. Eventually, Moore's affections shifted again, this time toward the beautiful and elegant Italian actress Luisa Mattioli, whom he met while filming a movie in Italy. The connection between Roger Moore and Luisa Mattioli unfolded like a slow-burning romance from one of his own films, intimate, passionate, and at times fraught with sacrifice. Their love began quietly during a film shoot in Italy, but it quickly turned serious, deepening even amid the emotional storms that trailed behind from Moore's previous relationship with Dorothy Squires. Though their union sparked public gossip and ignited legal battles, particularly from Squires who felt bitterly betrayed, Moore ultimately followed his heart. He and Mattioli built a new life together, one that for many years brought both stability and joy. In 1969, they married officially and settled into a rhythm that combined the glamour of international stardom with the grounded warmth of family life. Together they raised 3 children, Deborah, Jeffrey, and Christian. Moore, ever the consummate gentleman, took to fatherhood with affection and grace. He juggled his globe-trotting schedule with quiet moments at home, attending school functions when he could, and sharing with his children the values of courtesy, humor, and resilience. Those who remember the glitz of the Bond years Moore striding across exotic locations in perfectly tailored suits might be surprised to know how deeply he cherished ordinary pleasures. He enjoyed tending to his garden, watching cricket, and spending time in the kitchen with his children, sharing stories and laughs between film shoots. His family gave him a kind of anchoring he had long yearned for. But, like many long marriages, cracks eventually formed. As the years passed and Moore's travel commitments mounted, often filming for months at a time in far-flung corners of the world, the distance between him and Luisa quietly widened. The pressures of fame, combined with personal differences and shifting emotional landscapes, slowly eroded what had once been a secure foundation. By 1993, after nearly a quarter-century of marriage, Moore and Mattioli quietly chose to live apart. It was during this same year that life presented him with one of its gravest challenges, a diagnosis of prostate cancer. The news was a jolt, a stark reminder that even those who seem invincible on screen are still deeply human off it. The illness forced Moore to pause, to reflect, and to reevaluate what truly mattered. Though he underwent successful treatment, the experience marked him profoundly. It was during this deeply personal reckoning that Christina Kiki Tholstrup entered his life in a meaningful way. Kiki, a Danish-Swedish former neighbor and widow, was elegant in the most unassuming way, poised, thoughtful, and possessing a quiet strength. At a time when Moore was coming to terms with illness, aging, and emotional solitude, Kiki offered not just comfort, but genuine companionship. There was no glamour in their early connection, just warmth. And perhaps that's why it lasted. Over time, their friendship blossomed into love, gently, patiently, and with mutual respect. In 2002, they married, surrounded not by flashing cameras and fanfare, but by those who knew the value of a second chance at happiness. For Moore, this was a love that asked for nothing, but gave everything in return. With Kiki by his side, Roger entered a season of calm. No longer burdened by the demands of stardom, he dedicated himself fully to charity work, especially through UNICEF, and to enjoying the simple pleasures of life, a quiet stroll, a good meal, the sound of laughter. Kiki stood beside him through it all, through award ceremonies and health scares, through the waning public appearances and the quiet nights spent watching old films. When Sir Roger Moore passed away in 2017, he did so in peace, in the warmth of a life fully lived and a love fully found. For all the roles he played, swashbuckler, spy gentleman, perhaps the most authentic was the one he lived in his final years, a man at rest with someone he loved. Looking back on his life not with regret, but with gratitude. As Roger Moore's star rose ever higher in the 1970s, his portrayal of James Bond became a global phenomenon. With every film, he further cemented his image as the epitome of British charm, witty, refined, unflappable. In contrast, Frank Sinatra remained a towering figure of American bravado, larger than life, unpredictable, often tempestuous. Though they rarely shared screen time, Moore and Sinatra moved through the same glittering social circles, often attending the same premieres, charity events, or dinners hosted by studio executives and Hollywood royalty. Yet, despite the glamour surrounding these events, Moore was known to visibly bristle whenever Sinatra entered the room. There was a coldness in Roger's eyes, one longtime associate once said, and if he smiled, it was the sort of smile that didn't quite reach the corners. What had started as a private dislike gradually became an open secret among those in the know. Moore rarely spoke about Sinatra in interviews. He was far too gentlemanly for that, but those close to him could sense the silent disapproval whenever Sinatra's name arose. At the heart of Moore's distaste lay a fundamental difference in values. Where Moore revered professionalism, Sinatra operated by impulse. Where Moore arrived, punctually polished and prepared, Sinatra was known for keeping people waiting, sometimes for hours, especially if a poker game or cocktail had taken precedence. Moore found such behavior not only discourteous but emblematic of a kind of Hollywood arrogance he despised. It wasn't just personal. It was philosophical. Moore once told a friend during a quiet dinner in London, "There's a way to behave when you're fortunate enough to be admired. You lift others, not put them down." Sinatra never understood that. There were other incidents whispered about over years, Sinatra reportedly refusing to appear at a UNICEF benefit where Moore was speaking, citing scheduling conflicts, though many suspected otherwise. Another story made the rounds about Sinatra snubbing Moore at a charity gala in Monte Carlo, dismissing him as the guy who got lucky in a tux. But Roger Moore, ever composed, never responded publicly. He carried himself with the quiet pride of someone who didn't need to win a shouting match to make his point. And as the decades passed, Moore's reputation for kindness, grace, and humor only deepened, while Sinatra's legacy remained more complex, revered for his voice but remembered for his volatility. In his later years, Moore would occasionally allude ever so lightly to a few bad apples in the business who didn't understand what it meant to treat others with respect. He never named names, but those who knew him didn't need to ask. In a long and luminous career that has spanned more than 6 decades, Sir Roger Moore met just about everyone worth meeting in Hollywood and beyond. Kings and queens, world leaders, starlets, moguls, and all manner of personalities who defined 20th century show business. Known for his refined demeanor, impeccable manners, and an easy charm that could disarm even the most hardened cynic, Moore rarely had a harsh word for anyone. He was by nearly all accounts a man who believed in diplomacy, dignity, and discretion. But if there was one name that could cause Roger Moore's famously arched eyebrow to rise not with wit but with disapproval, it was Frank Sinatra. Their feud, if one could call it that, was not a headline-grabbing tabloid affair. No public spats, no gossip columns filled with scandals. It was quieter than that, subtler. A slow, burning disdain cultivated over years built on moments of condescension, ethical mismatches, and a fundamental incompatibility of character. To understand the depth of Moore's aversion, one must first understand the kind of man he was. Born to a London policeman and a housewife during the Great Depression, Moore came of age during the Second World War, eventually serving as a young officer in the British Army. He had seen hardship, respected discipline, and carried with him an enduring belief in humility, no matter how grand the stage. Sinatra, meanwhile, was the product of a different mold, one shaped by smoky lounges, hard-edged ambition, and a crew of companions who didn't always play by the rules. He was known for his talent, no doubt, but also for his volatility, his towering ego, and his disdainful treatment of those he deemed beneath him, whether it be waitstaff, romantic partners, or fellow performers. Their personalities collided early on. One oft-recalled moment came at a high society gathering in the late 1960s, a time when Moore's fame from The Saint was on the rise. The actor was introduced to Sinatra, who reportedly gave him a cursory glance and dismissed him in front of others with a sneering quip about the soap commercial guy. The room laughed. Moore did not. It was a cruel jab, but not an isolated one. In the years that followed, Sinatra would continue to cast shadows over Moore's career, allegedly intervening when Moore was being considered for more serious dramatic film roles. One such instance occurred when Moore's name was floated for a co-starring role in a gritty wartime picture Sinatra was attached to. Sinatra, wielding the influence that only he could in those days, reportedly shut it down instantly, claiming Moore was too soft for the part. Word got back. Moore, hurt but composed as always, made note and did not forget. But what truly rankled Moore far beyond the slights and sabotaged opportunities was Sinatra's behavior off-stage. Moore was a gentleman through and through, and he held to an old-world code of respect for everyone, no matter their station. He made a point to treat assistants, drivers, waiters, and fans with grace and patience. Sinatra, on the other hand, was known for outbursts, for dismissiveness, for temperamental tirades that left a trail of bruised egos in their wake. Moore once said, privately, "If charm were a currency, he'd be bankrupt." The depth of Moore's distaste surprised those who knew him well. After all, Moore rarely disliked anyone. He could dine with politicians he disagreed with and share a drink with actors whose egos dwarfed their talent. But Sinatra he could not abide. In trusted company, Moore referred to him as the loudest bore at every table, or more sharply, the most overrated man in Hollywood. Even in his later years, when asked about Sinatra in interviews, Moore would reply with only the briefest smile, a tightening of the jaw, or the famous lift of one eyebrow, gestures that said more than words ever could. For Moore, the aversion wasn't just personal, it was philosophical. Sinatra represented the kind of power that bullied rather than uplifted, a brand of fame that demanded rather than inspired. And for a man like Moore, who believed that kindness was strength and that true class meant treating everyone with respect, that was a deal-breaker. In a life filled with friendship, laughter, and grace under pressure, Roger Moore's lasting grudge toward Frank Sinatra remains one of the rare moments when his famously warm disposition cooled. But even in that grudge, there was principle, a gentleman's quiet refusal to accept cruelty no matter how iconic the man delivering it. Roger Moore's journey through life and fame was not only one of charm and cinematic success, it was also quietly marked by a constant battle against his own body. Long before the tailored tuxedos and glamorous premieres, Moore's early years were defined by a string of health crises that might have broken the spirit of a lesser soul. But in true Moore fashion, he carried on with humor, dignity, and resilience. Born in 1927, Moore grew up in a time when medical care was far less advanced than it is today. In his early childhood, he endured a gauntlet of illnesses that would leave many shaken. Chickenpox, measles, and mumps, all now largely preventable through modern vaccines, swept through Moore's small frame, one after the other, keeping him bedridden for weeks. These were not mild childhood inconveniences. In the pre-antibiotic age, such illnesses carried real risk. But young Roger soldiered on. Then came more serious blows. Double pneumonia struck a terrifying diagnosis even now, but especially dangerous in the 1930s. Both lungs were infected, and the illness left him struggling to breathe, his life hanging by a thread. Jaundice followed, a condition that hinted at deeper health vulnerabilities taxing his young liver and giving him the telltale yellow hue that worried his parents deeply. Surgeries followed in short succession, first his appendix, then tonsils and adenoids. While such procedures are routine in today's world, in those days they meant long recoveries and carried considerable risk. Hospitals then were places of solemn silence and heavy smells of antiseptic, not the reassuring, brightly lit facilities we know now. Roger Moore would spend more of his childhood in recovery beds than on playgrounds. Though he recovered enough to enter his teenage years with a growing interest in acting and film, the legacy of his childhood health remained. It built in him a quiet endurance, one that would be tested time and again throughout his adult life. As Moore's career blossomed first on British television and then around the world as James Bond, his physical health continued to challenge him. The most persistent of these ailments, kidney stones, a condition Moore would battle for decades. The attacks came suddenly, and the pain was, as Moore once understated in an interview, worse than being shot at on screen. The stones would strike during some of the most high-profile moments of his career, including while filming Live and Let Die in 1973. During a break from shooting and between elaborate stunts and perfectly timed one-liners, Moore was rushed to the hospital in agony, suffering from a particularly severe bout. It was not the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Yet he never let the pain show on screen. That was part of Moore's magic. The effortless smile, the raised eyebrow, the cool delivery, all maintained even when he was enduring searing physical discomfort behind the scenes. Few fans watching him sprint across rooftops or pilot speedboats would have guessed he was sometimes returning to his trailer doubled over in pain, waiting for the next wave to pass. It was this quiet struggle invisible to audiences that added another layer to Moore's legacy. Beneath the elegance and ease was a man who bore more than his share of physical hardship. But he never let it define him. He refused to complain publicly or let his ailments overshadow his work. For Moore, illness was simply another role to play, one that required grace under pressure. He didn't dwell on it, and he rarely spoke about it unless prompted. "I've been lucky," he would say, downplaying the long list of ailments that might have made others bitter or broken. But those who knew him well saw the truth. Roger Moore was not only debonair, he was durable. And that, in its quiet way, made him all the more heroic. It was during the making of Moonraker in 1979 that the issue began to reappear, highlighting the fact that he required medical treatment once more and highlighting the recurrent nature of his ailment. In addition to these ongoing problems, Moore suffered repeatedly from injuries while performing in the Bond franchise, which featured a significant amount of stunts. Moore suffered a shattered tooth and a concussion as a consequence of the accident that occurred during the production of the adrenaline-fueled speedboat chase scene in Live and Let Die. The press originally minimized the severity of Moore's injuries initially, but they were fairly serious. It was a demonstration of his professionalism and passion that he insisted on carrying on with the shoot despite the injuries he sustained. In a similar manner, he endured excruciating burns to his buttocks all during the production of The Spy Who Loved Me, as a result of an explosion stunt that was chair-rigged and did not work properly. Not only did these accidents highlight the physical dangers that Moore endured when portraying 007, but they also highlighted the toll that these risks take on his body, particularly in light of the fact that he already had pre-existing health problems. Concerns about Moore's health got even more pressing during the decade of the 1990s. In 1993, he was given a diagnosis of prostate cancer, which is a condition that poses a significant risk to his life and requires rigorous treatment. Moore was able to recuperate and continue his job, notably his growing participation in humanitarian issues through UNICEF, thanks to the fact that the disease was detected at an early enough stage. Moore underwent effective therapy that allowed him to recover, having said that his respite was not a permanent one. The more he got older, the more health problems he started having. In the year 2003, Moore passed out in front of a surprised crowd when she was performing on stage during a live theater show on Broadway. After further investigation, it was determined that the occurrence was caused by a dangerously slow heart rhythm. As a result, the physicians decided to install a pacemaker in order to control his heartbeat and prevent deadly events from occurring. Despite the fact that he made a full recovery, it was yet another tipping point in his health. Moore was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2013, a chronic illness that further hindered his capacity to sustain the lifestyle he had earlier enjoyed. This diagnosis came 10 years after Moore had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He was forced to adhere to stringent food restrictions, take medicine, and undergo frequent monitoring in order to effectively manage the condition, which added to the expanding list of medical issues he was confronted with. The years leading up to his passing were marked by a gradual decline in his health that became increasingly fast. There was a growth found on his liver, which was a concerning indication that it was a precursor to the severe tumors that would later take his life. Despite the fact that it was originally watched and it was not thought to be immediately life-threatening, the spot indicated that there were underlying malignant tendencies that would eventually metastasize. In 2017, Moore was getting treatment for cancer when he was involved in a significant fall that resulted in a severely broken collarbone. This occurred during the time when Moore was undergoing treatment. It was difficult for him to move around, and his freedom was greatly restricted as a result of the injury, which was both painful and incapacitating. The fact that his body was becoming more and more fragile was a source of anguish for him and his family during that time. On May 23, 2017, Roger Moore passed away at the tranquil and scenic resort town of Crans, which is located in the state of Montana in Switzerland. As a result of his courageous fight against lung and liver cancer, he passed away without any pain or suffering at the age of 89, surrounded by his loved ones. His passing marked the conclusion of a lengthy journey that had been defined by both accomplishments in the film industry and personal struggles, not the least of which was the severe health issues he had been experiencing. Moore never allowed his infirmities to define him, and he maintained an extraordinary level of graciousness, humor, and dignity throughout his whole life, despite the numerous physical problems he encountered during his lifetime. It was right that he be laid to rest in Monaco Cemetery, which was a fitting setting for a man who had succeeded in achieving elegance, charm, and resilience in equal measure. Not only does his filmography ensure that his legacy will live on, but both his public and personal bravery in the face of persistent physical suffering will also ensure that his legacy will remain. Frank Sinatra passed away in 1998. Roger Moore in 2017. Neither ever reconciled. But today, their private feud sheds light on how even the brightest stars can burn each other behind the Hollywood curtain. One was The Voice, the other 007. And sometimes legends don't mix. Like, subscribe and tell us in the comments whose side are you on, Sinatra or Moore. Behind every smile in Hollywood, there's a story you were never meant to hear.